In the preterite tense, we run into a few unusual spelling changes. With these particular verbs, they're not really irregular verbs. We just have to modify the spelling a little bit to maintain pronunciation. Some people think that this is a little bit confusing. It's really not if you understand the rules of pronunciation in Spanish, but since it does have that potential to be confusing, it's worth having its own video. Let's talk briefly about letter sounds in Spanish. The letter C makes two sounds. It makes what we think of as a K sound, a K sound, and it also makes what we think of as an S sound or a S sound. Just like in English, it makes this K sound before an A, an O, or a U. And again, just like in English, it makes this sound before an E or an I. Similarly, the letter G makes two different sounds. It makes a G sound, what we think of as a G sound, before A, O, and U. Or it makes a H sound, what we think of as an H sound, more or less, before E and I. Keep in mind that these two letters each have two different sounds that they make based on what comes after them. If we were to look at a sample verb, I've put up here colocar, we would see what the problem is. Here I've conjugated colocar in the preterite tense, but we're going to see in a second that this is not accurate. Let's take a look at it and see if you can figure out why. According to what we have written here, we have, again, the verb colocar. Notice the K sound. Then we have colose, colocaste, colocó, colocamos, colocastes, and colocaron. The problem there is that all of these, except for the gel form, maintain that K sound toward the end. Colocaste, colocó. But the gel form, because it's followed by an E now, sounds like colose. In Spanish, we typically try to maintain the original sound of the word, and so they don't want this to be colose, they want to keep the K sound instead of the S sound. In order to maintain that K sound then, what we do is we change the C to a QU. Remember that QU in Spanish also makes the K sound, so now we have coloque, colocaste, and so forth. The change only happens here because that's the only place we had a problem. So with the car verbs, the verbs that end with CAR, we're going to make that change. The C is going to change to QU before the letter E so that we maintain the K sound. Looking at another example, this time a gar verb, we're going to see a very similar thing. Here we have the verb llegar. Notice the G sound. But in the gel form we have llegué. We've changed sounds there instead of G. Then we return to the G sound for all the rest. Llegaste, llegó, llegamos, llegastes, llegaron. So we're going to do a similar thing here. This time though we don't have to change the G. We're just going to add the letter U after the G because GU gives us a G sound. The U is silent here. So now we have llegué instead of llegué. So similar to what we had before with gar verbs, we're going to change the G to GU. Lastly, let's take a look at a zar verb. This one's a little bit harder to understand the reasoning because it's not a pronunciation issue so much as just kind of a minor little rule in Spanish. And that rule is that we never have Z before E. And one way that you can help yourself remember this is to think about the word cero, for instance, which means zero. Notice that our Z becomes a C in Spanish. Similarly, our word zebra in English is cebra in Spanish. So where we would have Z's in these words, Spanish has C's. We're going to see the same thing here most of the time, not a problem because it's a ZA, that's fine, ZO is fine. But right here we have ZE, we don't want that. So we're going to change that Z to a C. Doesn't really change the pronunciation, empecé, but it just makes it follow the rule that exists in Spanish. Which gives us then Z to C.